All right, let's call to order this December 11th meeting of the Knox County Audit Committee. And hopefully I've got the mic turned on here, and hopefully I don't turn it off the wrong way. But anyhow, Haley, could you call roll, please?
Jim Morrison,
Here.
Matthew Warren,
Here.
Commissioner Beeler,
Here.
Commissioner Jay,
Here.
Commissioner Schoonmaker.
Here.
5 minutes present.
And Commissioner Schoonmaker, would you lead us in the pledge, please, sir?
Would everyone please rise, face our nation's flag, and offer the proper salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I assume everybody got a copy of the last month's meeting, or the last meeting we had in September. Could I have a motion to approve and a second, please?
Motion to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. There were a few things on there that we talked about a little out of sequence, and one of them had to do with the renewal of the Pew contract, and I think we took care of that in that meeting, but we'll talk again about it just real quickly when Ted comes up to make sure where we are on the contract itself. So with that, we are now on item number 5, and that would be Chris Caldwell.
Good afternoon. I'm just going to share some information with you about how we've started out this fiscal year thus far. We'll talk a little bit about once we get the ACFR done, about how we ended the year. I will tell you that we ended the year in most every fund in a positive standpoint, and so we'll just focus a little bit about how this year is trending as we start the year. The commissioners on this committee will have already heard this information, but we'll share it again. We'll start with hotel motel tax. We've received the first 3 months payments for FY24, and we've received a little over 3.8 compared to about 3.5 million last year. So we're about 304,000 to the good, which is about 8.6% ahead of where we were a year ago. And a year ago, we had our best year ever of hotel motel tax collections, right at, I think, $14 million of collections in hotel motel tax. So that revenue source continues to outpace what we've seen in history, actually. And just focus on a few other just miscellaneous revenue sources. Gasoline tax, we've received 3 months worth of gasoline tax thus far this year. We're about $50,000 ahead of where we were a year ago, which is about 2.75%. Business tax, which both of these we get from the state, 3 months in business tax as well. About 126,000 to the good, which is about 8.4% ahead of where we were a year ago. Wheel tax, we've received about 4 months worth. We've received 4 months of wheel tax. That revenue source is actually down about $262,000, which is about 4.85% negative. And so that's the one bad piece. We'll look at property tax revenue as well. We've received thus far September through November on current property tax, and we're basically flat on current taxes as to where we were a year ago. And so no growth in the current piece. The biggest 2 months that we received in property tax collections will be February and December in that order, really. And so we'll get a much better read of where we are after this month that we're currently in. If you look at delinquent taxes, same period, September through November, we're about 1.2 million ahead of where we were a year ago. If you want to get into percentages, it's about 4,300. I mean, about 4,300% ahead of where we were a year ago. Clerk and master delinquent, which basically means that they have been delinquent greater than 1 year, September through November, is about $149,000 ahead of where we were a year ago, which is about 22% to the positive. Interest and penalty on those delinquent taxes are about $138,000 ahead of where we were a year ago, which is about 28%. Big piece is bank interest earned. July through September is about 1.6 million of where we were a year ago, which is about 268%. So all that deals with Fed rate, right? So our banking contract pays us Fed rate plus 15 bips. And so as that interest rate has went up, our interest revenue has went up. And when it comes down, it will come down, of course. And so local option sales tax, we've received basically 3 months worth of local option sales tax. First month, which would be July collections, I'll just focus on the general, basically on just Knox County as a whole, was about 4.59% ahead of where it was a year ago. You go to the next month of August, the Knox County piece was about 3% ahead of where it was a year ago. Then you get to September, and that percentage is about 0.44% ahead of where it was a year ago. So what we have seen on sales tax collections is basically a leveling off and basically a flattening of their revenue source. And while that's important, I think it's important to talk about, if you've followed any of the state budget hearing news, the state wants you all to know, wants everybody across the state to know that revenue projections are flat, right? And so you're going to hear from the state, there are no monies to be had for your projects. We're going to be very much tight and status quo. I think if you look and you look at what we're seeing on the local option sales tax piece, if that flattens out and that revenue source is flat, Chris Simons would tell you that the state is probably projecting a 1% increase in TISA this year. So if you get a 1% increase in TISA and and local option sales tax is flat, and we receive our typical growth of property tax of 1.5 to 2%, what does that growth look like for a total budget? It's really what the state is saying as well, right? It's very flat. I think you will see the state propose a state budget this year basically of less than 1% growth. And so I think that's kind of a telling sign of where things are headed. And so I'll take your questions.
Commissioner Schoonmaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Caldwell, on the local option sales tax where it's been decreasing steadily, is the 0.44, did we get compensated for the 90-day cap on groceries?
Yes, so what the state does is they do a calculation and they make the locals whole for that 3-month sales tax holiday. And so they've not really shared what that calculation is, but it's based on some sort of calculation on what we probably received last year and included some growth. But that does include that. I think what you will see the state do this year, I don't want to speak for them, but I think these sales tax holidays, if your revenue is flat, I don't think you'll see a sales tax 3-month holiday. You may still have the weekend sales tax holiday that they'll do at the start of the school year, but I don't foresee them doing any more sales tax holidays if they continue with their revenue projections being flat.
Okay, and then when do you think we'll receive October's sales?
We will receive October this month, and so typically it's around the 19th or the 20th.
Okay, thank you.
We'll see if we get a lump of coal in our stocking or if we get something better. Pretty good, Ted, wasn't it?
Hey, Chris, looking forward to next month and whenever we have a time to review ACFR, what's that looking like in terms of availability?
Yeah, I think ultimately, we actually had a meeting last week, and if you ask Ted or Perry or myself, we are hopeful that we can have an issue date of 12/31. If it's not done by 12/31, it'll be done shortly thereafter. There's been really not any major hiccups. It's just wrapping up and getting everything completed at this point.
Let's tell you what, let's go ahead and let Ted come up, and Ted, you can talk about that too, as well as maybe the schools report and where that will be. But you give us your regular update first, so.
Okay. Well, yes. First, Ted Holtz, Pew CPAs, Knoxville, Tennessee. As far as the regular update goes on the county audit, we are in the final stages. We have a few loose ends, but nothing major. No areas that remain that haven't been tested at all. It's just loose ends, which is common for this time of year. So from a testing standpoint, we're in good position. Regarding the report itself, I echo what Chris says. We're still shooting for December 31st. It's going to be tight. I don't know if we'll make it or not, but I will also reiterate what Chris said. It's really going to be either 12/31 or shortly thereafter. It's not going to be a long period of time after, because we're close. You get to the end and you're trying to get the 12/31 deadline done, but you also have the holidays and so forth, which affects staffing. And the last thing we want to do is rush the report out, and we want to make sure it has all of the proper levels of review, both internally from the county's perspective and externally through our quality review process. So that's the real question. We are going to have a complete draft of the report ready by the end of the year. That's going to either be in final shape or near final shape. That's what I see. So.
Okay, I heard you say that's the real question. I was kind of looking for the real answer as to, is that something we should assume we're going to need to wait till February meeting? Or are we going to be able to, because our next meeting would be mid-January, and I think that might be pushing.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the internal school funds report as well, because we are probably a little behind where we usually are with that report, but we are in draft stage there. We have not yet had the meeting. We're getting ready to set a meeting with Knox County personnel regarding what findings we have, so we can discuss them and draft our final report. The bulk of the report, the first 350 pages or so, they're ready. It's just a matter of getting through the findings section, which is the last 10 or so pages, and submitting them. Any considerations that we need to have, and any tweaks in language that would be appropriate. We're at that stage, but we also recognize we're getting close to the end of the school year before Christmas break, and we like to present to the school board first. School board normally meets in like the first week in January, so we're a little tighter than we'd like to be with that schedule. I think it's safe to say that we can have that meeting as long as we can have our preliminary meeting with Knox County management. Knox County Schools Management, excuse me.
Okay, so, and that would be at their, if everything works out right, that'd be their first week in January meeting.
So, and I don't know what's going to be the pleasure of the committee regarding whether we want to present the schools report and the county report at the same time, or whether we split them. We often split them, so that's really going to be the question. And getting back to the county report, our process is that we finalize the ACFR first, and we already have our write-up of any potential findings that we would have, but there's a process there as well where we want to have meetings with any departments involved in any findings and get resolution on that and have a clear final product that everyone understands and there's no surprises in. So doing that by mid-January would be tight, but not impossible, because that's pretty much around the period where we would want to present. Both reports would be clearly out and ready sometime in January, so both would be ready before a February meeting, but if you wanted to combine them. But I do think at least one of the reports will be available for a January meeting if you want to have a January meeting as well.
And we're going to come down and discuss the weeks of, or some of the meetings in the next couple of months, but I like having one in January if we can, which I assume would be the schools. And if we had to, don't know if we pick some day other than a workshop Monday or formal meeting Monday, so.
We'll try to avoid a Monday.
Okay. All right, so any other questions of Ted?
I think you wanted me to address the contract as well.
Yes, go
Okay.
ahead, and I know we've got Matt and we've
Yes.
got Jay Garrison here also, so.
Correct. Basically, we will draft the contract in early January and submit it to procurement. And
Now,
at
this
that
is-
point, that process will start.
When you're drafting the contract, that's between you and Knox County, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
But it also, the contractual terms, although they won't change much, they still go through the legal process as well, reviewed by the legal team. So,
And that's Knox County's legal team?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, and I'd like to make sure that's done too, so.
But I would anticipate that the contract will be available for the next meeting, or certainly no later than a February meeting if we have a February meeting.
And then that would then go to county commission for final approval?
Yes.
Okay.
But if it goes in February, goes to county commission in March, then we're in excellent shape.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can get it done in maybe January then for that,
And that works too, and,
okay.
Matt or
And,
Jay are welcome to speak regarding that as well.
Well, I was going to ask Matt or Jay, do you have anything else to say as to where we stand or how this is going to fit your schedule? Hey, Matt.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Matt Myers, Knox County Procurement. Your question again, sir, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just wanting to understand if our progress so far or where it looks like it's heading with the Pew version of the contract fits your schedule and needs. I know we in September, we did the go-ahead for another year, correct? I think we approved that.
Yes, we are renewed
Correct.
April 1st of '24 through March 31st of '25.
Okay,
That has been done. So in this coming fall, we would like a decision so we can either, work on the documents or start a new process.
okay. And then the actual process of the draft that Ted will be putting together now for this same, I assume this is the same time period you're talking about, the contract with
believe so.
Knox County?
Okay. Well,
Just for clarity, it has been approved, but we still have to go through the state contracting process, and that part of the contract will need to be done and go through this committee. which happens in January, February. So
But we've not seen the January.
I have not drafted
Okay,
the
right.
state contract yet. There's an agreement between the county and us that's been accepted and signed, but there is also a required state contract that the state imposes on all auditors and municipalities. So,
Commissioner Schoonmaker?
I just like to say, I think we have done this for numerous years.
Right.
About 2 different contracts. And I understand there's something that the state issues and Ted and do, but the one I'm, concerned about and, is the one that is approved by the Audit Committee, is approved by County Commission, signed by the mayor and Ted.
Right.
And that one goes April 1 to March 31st.
And while we've agreed to that in context, we've not seen that to actually approve that yet, correct?
So it had, the
That
original
contract.
contract had. Yes. We have actually, this body and county commission. Sorry, I put my hand down, slapped it. The renewal has been approved by
Right.
both the audit committee and county commission. So we're good, from my standpoint, through 25,
Okay.
March 31st to 25. I know he's got his state contract that the dates don't necessarily correlate. I'd like for him to somehow, some way, so we could all be working off the same start and end date.
All right, so that's the one that we'll have to approve. Okay, and so the one you were working on or going to be working on has already been agreed to?
yes, that, just for the sake of the microphone, it has been agreed to. There's still the state's language in there, but there's no significant changes from before, and it's not going to contradict anything that's in the agreement that we've already signed.
Okay, all right. I think Commissioner Schoonmaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what Mr. Holtz does not affect what Mr. Myers does with his deal. Because my understanding is the comptroller of the Treasury audits the smaller counties in Tennessee. They give the option to the larger counties for us to contract with somebody like Pugh and Associates to do our audit. So the state is just saying they want their criteria to match up with what yours is. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. But we're good to go for a year. It's just he's got to satisfy the state's requirement.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Ted, thank you. Do you have anything else? Or is that enough?
Nothing else on my list.
We warned you out enough? Okay, well, thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you.
And next, we've got Chris Simons with the schools.
Chris Simons, Knox County Schools. You should have received the financial summary through October last week. Just kind of running through a lot of that. Chris hit on a lot of what I was going to talk about, so thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Just starting from the top, if you look in that percent of budget received column, that's kind of what I analyze, and then also the comparative. If you think of through October being around 33% of the time, or where we should be at as the kind of baseline, and then what varies off of that. So I was going to kind of talk about that stuff. As far as local taxes go, revenue-wise, that's showing a little over 15%. That's going to be 2 months of sales tax and then a little bit of property tax at this point. So that's all timing there. Dropping down to state of Tennessee, that's obviously our TISA funds. That's sitting around 30%. There's 10 payments, and we've got 3 in there, so that makes sense. All other, the majority of that is actually indirect cost. So that's money we get back tied to federal dollars. And actually a large chunk of that, probably about 9 million of it, is related to our ESSER dollars. So I'll talk about that a little bit later, but remember that's going away. So that budget number will be a lot lower next year along with, other things. So, that timing wise, that those ESSER dollars will be spent later as the salaries and stuff start coming through, then those revenues will be, get higher. Dropping down to expenditures, salaries and benefits, a lot of that, the 26%, appears low because a lot of majority of our contracts begin in August, so we've only got a few months in there, so that percentage makes sense. Contracted services and supplies and materials, those are totally reasonable, at this point in time. Debt on construction, capital outlay, that's probably the biggest variance from prior year. Last year, we had sent the transfer over earlier. We've actually already sent that over in the month of December, so you'll see that on future financial summaries. But through October, we hadn't sent it over, so that's kind of that small amount. All other, we actually have some realized savings there regarding our charter school monies that pass through from us to them. When we did the budget, we weren't aware of how TISA was going to flow through to us. We had made a conservative estimate, and so there's actually realized savings there once the state came out and said we want it this way. So we didn't know that until about June, so that was well after the budget was approved. Dropping down.
Chris, could I ask a question on the supplies and materials? Is that where people have just, because of the start of the school year, run out and bought everything they need for the entire year?
Yeah, that one is obviously going to be a lot higher at the beginning, which we want. I mean, I don't want to see that number low and then at the end of the year, everybody's like, oh, I don't spend all my money and, trying to rush and spend all that money for something that's not going to benefit this year, So that's typical in in all of our, each of our years. Like last year we had, at this point, we had actually 40%. So we were actually a little bit higher last year at this point in time. Is there any other questions on that top part? Dropping down to the comparative, looking at this year to last year and kind of comparing our revenue wise, I mean, we're slightly higher percentage wise, actual versus budget. And then if you look down at the total expenditures as a whole, that's obviously, like I said, the debt service payment. If we adjusted for the debt service payment, which we have transferred over to the county, we would be at about 31% through October. So that's totally right in line where we would expect to be. I will say just kind of some favorable, I know Larson asked in Finance Committee to kind of give some favorable, unfavorable type things, and I appreciate that. That's stuff we're internally always trying to talk about and be aware of, but our favorable one obviously is our fund balance. We got very healthy fund balance. After this audit comes out, or after fiscal year 23, we're sitting at about 14% of our fiscal year 24 operating budget. So GFOA guidance recommends having a greater than 10%. And then obviously the state requirement's 3%. So we've got, unless it's for unforeseen circumstances. So we're really healthy there, and that's all unrestricted, and it's close to 2 months of operating for us, mainly payroll. And then that's the favorable side, and then obviously the areas of concern is kind of what Chris mentioned. Definitely the funding sustainability, state funding model with TISA. We had about a 25 to 27% increase from 23 to 24 on that revenue line, and if it goes down to 1%, I mean, we live off the growth, so that's going to hurt really bad. And then also, like I said earlier, ESSER funding ends in September of 24, so we're going to get a double whammy there because you have all these expenses that we still have these needs that we're going to roll into general purpose. And then also you got the indirect costs that's attached to that. That's revenue that's going to be going down now. So it's going to be I think it's going to be a hard hit. And then obviously sales tax, like Chris mentioned, that's flattening. For example, I ran, now this is a November, so this would have been November, the amount we received for September collection. So just year over year, like from 22 to 23, we had received about $5 million more from, through November for September collections. Hope that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. So that was at this point last year. This year, we're only about 1.3 million over through November/September collection. So you can see it went from 5 million over down to 1.4, so it's, or 1.3, so it's a very small amount of growth that we've got on sales tax. Obviously, the economy, consumer spending and unemployment rates and inflation and Fed rates attached to that, all that stuff is a big impact on all three of those. So that's kind of where we're at. Any questions you guys may have?
Going back in time a little bit, I remember when some of the ESSER funding and everything was coming in, there was discussion about how it would be spent, and was it going to be spent for non-reoccurring type items so that you wouldn't have this hit, some years later of having to come up with that money? Is that tracking kind of like y'all had planned, or was there more of it that got permanent spending rather than, just incremental spending back then?
Yeah, I would have to provide you something that would, but I think they tried to do more one-time spending or things that we were gonna have to do anyways, and, you have to, there's these certain criteria, it goes in, it's a lot of detail, it's, you have to
Right.
spend it this way, it has to be for this, this, and this, and it was stuff we were needing to do anyways, so, but I say that to say, it still has to meet these certain criteria. And it could have been upgrades we had to do, but we may have done it another way if we didn't have that funding, So that's kind of where we're at. But I could definitely provide you like a report.
If you could, please.
Yeah.
Commissioner Jay?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you go back to the TISA funding? We just heard from Director Caldwell about, the relatively flat year over year. What were you all communicated, what was communicated to you when TISA was announced about, sort of the first 3 years? And how is that matching up to the reality of, or was it so vague that they were like, good luck, we'll see you next year?
I mean, the initial funding was very vague, but we knew it would be a lot of funds. But we were pretty aware that it was going to be a much lower amount the second year coming in. So that's kind of where, we're trying to plan and be ready for this.
Okay, so you were anticipating this sort of flat to?
On TISA, yes.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions for Chris? Chris, I think that's it, bud. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'll send that, or I'll get that report
Okay.
sent to you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you all.
All right, now I think we're going to bring up our new, as the statute calls it, our county auditor, I think is the word they use, but Zach Fullerton took over for Andrea's job as head of internal audit, and he has the enviable task of discussing a couple of reports that were done before he came on board, because we have a couple people out, Richard Pugh's out today with had a child born, I think, over the weekend or something, so, and then Wendell's out sick. So, Richard, I'll let you go ahead and just start on, the two reports you've got, and then if you want to roll that into the internal audit update package you've got, and then if you'll take us that far, then I'll pick up back on the agenda.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, Audit Committee. I'm Zach Fullerton, Knox County Internal Audit. So this first audit, the EPW fee collection process, this was run by Richard Pugh as the lead auditor. As Jim mentioned, Richard became a father for the first time over the weekend. Emery Cooper, born December 9th at 5 a.m., hopefully a future auditor. But, healthy baby, healthy mother. So congrats to Richard. And of course, that means I'm the lucky person that gets to present his report, right? Tried to familiarize myself with the report and some of the work papers as well as I could. Obviously, the work was done prior to me coming on board. So if there's technical questions, we might need to get back with Richard and get back to you. But that said, the results are fairly straightforward. So let's jump into it. The objective of this audit was to determine if internal controls and processes governing fees collected by EPW are adequately designed and working effectively. To do that, we looked at 3 revenue sources, and if you'll look in the report on page 1, those revenue sources are outlined there. We've got building permits, building inspections, and zoning variances. And you can see that in fiscal year '21, the revenue from that was a little over $2.7 million. In fiscal year '22, it eclipsed $2.8 million. Now, to get at our objective, we essentially asked 3 different questions, and those questions are at the top of page 2. The first was, does EPW have adequate controls in place to ensure completeness and accuracy of service fee transactions? And we found that, yes, they do have adequate controls, and those are built around the data platforms that are presented at the bottom of page 2. And you'll actually see there in the middle of those data platforms, one is Cartograph, and I just think it's interesting, it's sort of a coincidence, but for the commissioners, on the work session agenda today is the renewal for the Cartograph software. So it sort of gives you a little insight into what that software does, and maybe you can make a more informed vote. But that's critical software that they use for their fee processing and fee calculation. So back to our questions. Let me jump down to question 3 there. Are internal controls in place to ensure that EPW properly reviews and approves permit applications in compliance with applicable laws? Again, we found, yes, the Codes Department has a defined and transparent process for that. The process is outlined on page 3. I'm not going to go through the details, but it flows as you would imagine. A member of the public applies for a permit. All permits are reviewed by a Codes Department employee. Plan examiner checks for accuracy, so forth. So no problems there. The third question we ask, which is listed second in the report there, is whether EPW is in compliance with all applicable laws, regulations, and policies related to fee collection, depositing, and accounting. And we found that yes, generally they are. However, we did identify one finding related to TCA 5-8-207A1, which is known colloquially as the 3-day deposit law. Essentially, the law states that within 3 days of the receipt of funds by a county official, those funds must be deposited in the county official's official bank account. Right, so our testing here, it was sort of split into 2 different phases, right? One for pre-Cartograph transactions and one for post-Cartograph transactions. The reason we did that is because Cartograph is so important to their process and things substantially changed following its implementation. So for the pre-Cartograph universe, we found that 36 transactions out of 578 fell outside of that 3-day deposit window. In the post-Cartograph universe, only 2 transactions out of 181 fell outside of the 3-day window. So I think what you see there is that Cartograph really helped reduce the instances of noncompliance, but we did still have a 1.1% error rate there. So we made the recommendation, of course, that EPW take steps to rectify this issue, get the funds deposited in a more timely manner. Thankfully, EPW and the Codes Department, they took immediate action during the course of the audit to remedy the situation. They cross-trained some employees. I think they may have actually hired an additional employee as part of the administrative staff just to more efficiently handle the deposit of those physical checks and ensure timeliness. And since the issue was corrected during the audit, we did not have an official recommendation in the report. So to me, that's really the best case scenario. Problems identified, management takes immediate action, and we don't even have to do a formal recommendation. So kudos to EPW. Now, there were several other testing areas that we looked at. You can see those on page 5 of the report at the bottom in the chart. We didn't identify any issues, but just wanted to, briefly mention that because these are things that EPW does well, right, that the fees were calculated accurately, any waived permit fees were appropriate, fee reimbursements were accurately recorded, and voided permit fees were applied appropriately. So that's sort of the sum of that audit. I think based on these results, we can say with reasonable assurance that the fee collection and recording process is adequately controlled at EPW. And just a comment that Richard sent me this morning that I wanted to pass along. don't know if anybody from EPW is here, but he just wanted to thank EPW for their cooperation on the audit and add that it was a pleasure working with them. They were very receptive to the audit, and they were diligent in getting us requested information, which is oftentimes the hardest part of our job, is getting requested information. So thanks to EPW, and he just said, based on the testing, the process seems to be in a very healthy state. So open it up to questions.
Commissioner Schoonmaker? Thank
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you give us an example of a waived permit fee?
I'm sure Richard could, but
Okay.
I
didn't
I'm
know
not
if you knew
sure.
why we'd be waiving permit fees if you're supposed to have a permit.
Sure. I guess we do have one EPW.
Because so in other words, you sampled 26 of those according to the document.
Correct.
Steve Elliott, Director of Development Services, Knox County. Typically, those fees are waived for like Knox County Schools, PBA. When you look at those permits, we don't charge
Governmental.
ourselves a permit fee. So most of those were related to Knox County projects.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir.
The test there, of course, would have been to determine if those waivers were appropriate based on the criteria that they have. So good to see that they were waiving them correctly and appropriately. So if there's no other questions, we can move on to the next one. The next one, unfortunately, is a little bit more complicated. Knox County Sheriff's Office audit, the non-seized inventory audit. We've done Knox County Sheriff's Office a couple of times in some other inventory areas, and it's been fruitful. So I assume that's why we included this in the fiscal year plan. Again, Wendell was the lead auditor on this. He's unfortunately sick today, so I'm filling in on the presentation. The objective of this audit was to determine if Knox County Sheriff's Office has properly accounted for inventory in the custody of the department or individual employees to include firearms, ammunition, tactical armor, body cams, tasers, and portable radios. So I think it's important to have a little bit of background to sort of put this all into context. KCSO has just over 1,000 employees, and approximately 425 of those are what they call Tennessee Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission sworn officers. So that's where that POST post acronym comes in that you see throughout the report. All newly hired KCSO law enforcement personnel are either currently post certified, so they would be moving in from another Tennessee jurisdiction. They are certified officers from out of state who go through a modified post certification course, or newly hired cadets that come in and do a 12-week post-certified training course. And KCSO actually has like a full-time training unit which maintains its own professional training staff, and they host a number of specialized trainings throughout the year. So all newly hired KCSO law enforcement personnel are issued their firearms, ammunition, ballistic vests, tasers, and portable radios through that training director or that training unit staff. The IT department for KCSO does handle the issuance of body cams, but mainly everything through the training director and the training unit staff. The inventory for records for those items are maintained in two separate inventory systems, and I think those are on the page, bottom of page 1. So you have RMS for firearms, ballistic vests, portable radios. You have the Axon database system for tasers and body cams. So two systems that we're working with. And we conducted two main tests here, which are at the top of page 2. In test 1, we wanted to tie the system to the physical inventory. So what are the records in the system? Can we verify it, with the individual who owns that inventory? And then test 2 tied the inventory that we have on hand to the system, right? So you're going both ways. In the first test, what we did was identified a sample of 59 officers who have this inventory, and then we met with the officers to verify the issued inventory was recorded correctly in the system. In the second test, we selected 30 items of inventory from the training academy that was present at the location and determined if that inventory was present in the system. So based on our testing and the questions we asked, we identified 6 total findings, with one of them being significant. So I'll try to go through them briefly, each one by one. Finding number 1, which is at the top of page 3, this first issue is really the crux of it, right? It relates to inventory database inaccuracies. You can see in the chart there, the inventory for the 59 employees was tested against the data from RMS, and we had a large number of exceptions. The numbers in red are considered quantitatively significant, over a 5% error rate. The second test, in which we tested the hands-on item at the location to the inventory systems, resulted in a record rate of 3.33%, 1 in 30. So of course, our recommendation to fix these issues was that the training academy conduct routine inventory audits of all the inventory assigned to personnel. KCSO was receptive to that, stated they would implement monthly monitoring for officers' inventory and ensure that the database discrepancies were rectified. And that was really our only significant finding, and probably the biggest takeaway from the engagement. I think the logical question there is, like, are these things just walking out the door? No, I think it's more so database problems. Database doesn't get updated appropriately. Things don't get recorded when they're handed out to an officer. And that's the reason that the database is inaccurate, not that the items themselves are gone.
Is that spelled out here somewhere? I haven't read this thoroughly.
I'm not sure that it is. I'm not sure that it is, but I can follow up with Wendell and get for sure clarification on that and provide it to you all in an email, just to make sure. But
Okay.
That's my understanding based on the conversations that we'd had previously. So on the next page, finding 2.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
regarding what you just talked about? So did it show, like, for instance, a ballistic vest? Is it possible that one deputy, that vest was transferred to another deputy? Did their database show anything of that significance, or?
I don't think that it did. I don't think that it's I don't think it has the functionality to sort of track when it gets transferred from one person to another person. And it also might be a situation where the officer's ballistic vest was used, right? And when it's used, it has to get sent to surplus, surplus. And that might not be tracked in the system. So there's some things that can happen outside of just the normal day-to-day that would lead to database errors.
Okay, and then they had no record for ammunition then?
No exceptions for ammunition. So all of the ammunition was accounted for. Basically, if the system says this officer has 50 rounds, that officer was able to come in and say, here are my 50 rounds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the most expensive thing would be the portable radios?
Or the tasers. I mean, with tasers, 18 exceptions, 34.6 Super 8. I don't really know what the, expense is between the items, but
Okay.
certainly a 34% error rate is even more significant than we would normally see.
Okay.
But do we have any feel for what made up, just on the tasers, for example, the 18 exceptions?
I don't know. I mean, I think tasers are probably more transitory, just like IT equipment. You sort of take it everywhere with you. Maybe you don't take your rounds everywhere. But again, we would follow up with Wendell and let you know what it was specifically about tasers.
Yeah, please do.
That was so significant. So if we turn the page to page 4 and get into the rest of the findings are much lower level. I think probably just standard inventory control gaps that you see in a lot of places. Finding 2 just relates to separation of duties. Basically you would have authorized personnel who issue the firearms and ammunition also conducting inventory counts and putting it into the record of system. So ideally, those functional responsibilities would be segregated to ensure that if an error was made by one person, it was identified by the next person. KCSO stated that due to scheduling, time off, periods of instruction, things of that manner, it's just not practical, right? We don't have the people, we don't have the resources. And I get that. The way around that, I think, and what they're planning to do, the training director is going to periodically review the changes that are made by the personnel for appropriateness to try to mitigate that risk. Finding 3, a lack of inventory system for practice ammunition. So the sheriff actually allocates 50 rounds of practice ammo per certified officer per month. So technically that should be tracked, right? Well, currently it was, at the time of the audit, it was not. So that we recommended just that the sheriff's office initiate sort of a uniform method of issuing the practice ammo to authorized personnel. KCSO agreed. They're going to utilize a sign-in and usage log when someone comes to the training facility. Finding 4, still on page 4 there. During the audit, Wendell actually observed a room that contained non-issuable stored weapons. My assumption is that non-issuable stored weapons are weapons of advanced age or perhaps weapons that have a defect or something wrong with them. They do not maintain records, inventory records for these because the weapons are no longer actively used. That said, it'd obviously be a much stronger control environment if we had an inventory tracking mechanism for those weapons, which leads into our recommendation. KCSO agreed and stated that they're going to conduct an inventory and maintain documented inventories for all weapons that are considered non-issuable. On the next page, page 5, storage and disposition of body armor. And this sort of gets back to my answer to the Commissioner Schoonmaker's question about the disposal of body armor. That also came up in the audit. During the audit, it was noted that there was no designated location for the storage of new or used body armor, and that basically when they sent the items to surplus, there was no documentation retained of that transaction. So we just recommended, a formal policy for the storage of the body armor, properly document the disposal of the equipment with surplus. This issue was actually corrected during the course of the audit, always nice to see. So the recommendation is satisfied. They've got the policy. They have the inventory system now is updated to list the body armor that's issuable and in date versus body armor that is ready to be surplused. And then when they are ready to be surplus, they create a memo of each item with the serial number and have it signed off by the surplus agent when they receive it. And then the last finding, finding 6, still on page 5, just relates to a lack of general orders which articulate sort of the standard inventory procedures. And that's with regards to the things we looked at: firearms, ammunition, body armor, portable radios. We just recommended that these orders or directives be created, and KCSO agreed and stated SOPs will be created pertaining to all phases of their inventory process for these items: issuance, assignment, and accountability. So again, we want to thank the Sheriff's Office for their participation in the audit. I think, Wendell really always enjoys working with them. They're very responsive as well, provide the information that we need. And I think the takeaway is that they're on the right track to fill in these gaps and provide good assurance over these inventory processes. It's, as you can imagine, the Sheriff's Office and their employees protect and serve the citizens, right? That's their first goal. So some of this background things can get lost in the shuffle, but I think, when we come in and make these recommendations, they understand it, they accept it, and they're willing to make improvements. So that's what you always want to see. Any questions on that audit?
Any other questions for Zach on that? And I appreciate Wendell's hard work, and I've got a lot of confidence in the work he's done with the Sheriff's Office in the past, so I think we've got some good information here. I may have a few more picky questions, but I'll get with him on that, but I appreciate it. And I guess now we are on to your internal audit update.
Sure.
And time-wise, we're running, okay.
I'm pretty long-winded. I don't know how quick I can be, but I'll get through it. So on page 2, obviously, we have the 3 closed projects, 2 that we just heard about, and then the IT security assessment report we have that was performed by a third-party vendor. We have the option to go into executive session and to discuss that if so desired. But I'll say just briefly that the results on that were very positive. I think there really aren't any significant cybersecurity gaps in the county's IT networks per Dynetics, so they were able to offer some pretty good assurances in that area. And then just as far as to reiterate what Jim said, all of those audits were before my time, so credit to the team for getting them done and keeping it moving forward. Don't want to take any credit for that personally. As far as ongoing projects, we have the contract management audit. It's being led by Richard. So contract management in the county is sort of difficult to wrap your head around. Hopefully Matt won't throw anything at me for saying that, but we have contracts that flow through procurement. We have some that only ever get in front of the law department, and then we have finance contracts. And so there's some difficulties in even wrapping your head around, well, what is our total universe of contracts in the county? So we are in the closing stages of field work on that. I think Richard's intent is to finish it in the coming weeks before he goes on his paternity leave. So we're thankful for him for doing that before he leaves us for a couple of months. We also initiated a fleet management program audit that's being led by Wendell. Pretty quickly wrapped up planning. It's on to the early fieldwork stages. I think he's done a good job of identifying the key risks and testing areas. So I'd say stay tuned on results from that audit in the first quarter of 2024. And then lastly, also performing a control risk evaluation of the health department's fee collection process. A lot of revenue is collected by the health department in fees. So just wanted to get some assurance about the processes that they have currently. Lori Mays is working on that, and she's constructing the process narratives and flows. She was going to be here today, but they called her and said, hey, we've got a process that we need you to see. So she took off and is over there right now, actually. I will say that I didn't realize how many different fees the health department collects. It's actually sort of staggering, and they have a lot of different processes. So sort of a big assignment, but maybe bigger than other CREs, but she's working through it, and I know Kevin Parton's a big help as well. Other items, staffing, always a challenge. We've got 2 open positions. I circulated the post with our local chapter of the Institute of Internal Auditors, had the alumni outreach coordinator for the accounting program at UT. He shared both of those positions on the accounting department's LinkedIn this week. Thanks to Matt for that connection. We did interview a few folks for the staff auditor position, but we just weren't able to find someone meeting the qualifications we're looking for. So if we don't get anybody in the current round, we'll circle back after the new year, maybe put them on Indeed. I think we're going to collaborate with finance and schools finance to attend a recruiting event at UT in February. So hopefully that'll be fruitful. But, it's just a tough market out there. I always say nobody goes to school to be an auditor. It takes a lot of mistakes in life to end up where I am. No, I'm just kidding. And a few companies in Knoxville compete for the very limited talent, right? So it's just a tough market. And I don't want to hire somebody personally just to fill a seat. I won't do that unless the committee tells me to do that. So as far as upcoming projects, I met with Dynetics, the IT vendor, last week to discuss getting them started on a new project. Want to do an applications control engagement, look at some applications that Knox County IT has developed in-house. And so we're sort of working through that process. They're going to get a statement of work for me put together by the end of the year, and hopefully spin that up in January. And then also, I mentioned in the update that I sent to you in November that, I want to change our audit plan to a fiscal year schedule. So I guess if we meet in January or February, our next meeting, we can discuss then sort of the game plan for the next 6 months. And then starting July 1st, we would have a full fiscal year 25 plan. If you go to page 4 in your packet, you'll see the overview of completed CREs. I think this is sort of a new way to visualize this information. I don't believe you guys have seen this before. You'll see an assurance rating there for each of the CREs. The first 2, 0%, don't have one because back in 2019, we were still trying to figure out how are we going to do CREs and how are we going to quantitatively report that. But the rest do. And I think the most recent ones that have been completed, maybe since the last audit committee, are the Knox County Schools coupon books and the clerk and master probate data process. Obviously, those had fairly low scores, indicating some deficiencies. The goal there is that the process owners take the information we give them, because what we give them at the end is a flow chart of their process and each gap identified, so they know the holes that they have. The hope is that they will take that back, improve upon their process, but we don't make any formal recommendations out of those. Now, we may choose to do like a follow-up CRE or even potentially even a full audit, but we've got to allow a little bit of time for them to make the improvements that are needed, right?
So basically, the CREs aren't going to result in an immediate audit. You're going to give them chance to
Yeah, that's the goal
set
is
the
that.
feedback and then
right.
make sure they've done something.
Yeah, and I know the school coupon book process changed a little bit this year already, and I'm sure you guys have talked about that.
Well, no, I don't think we have.
Oh, okay. Well,
So,
I think they switched to, they accept credit cards now for sure, trying to move
Okay.
away from cash collections, and a few other changes, but I'd have to let schools speak to that. But I mean, I think they're on the right track, and like I said, because those scores are lower, we might want to circle back in the future and get some more assurance in that area. And I think we can do a little bit better job about giving you guys some more information on these CREs. Still trying to figure out what that looks like, maybe a report that's discussed out to you. Right now, we tell the auditee or evaluee, the person that we are evaluating, that it's a non-public report that we give them, which is why we have not previously presented it to the audit committee. We could always do executive session and sort of discuss it.
well, I
but-
think part of the logic, as we had heard it as it was going on, this was going to be a testing ground for, did we need to do more?
Sure.
And so I'm not hearing that as much as we've turned it over to them. And I think we might want to tighten that up a little bit as to how we either get the feedback or what we're going to do with it.
Sure.
And then again, we can talk a little more about it, but that was more my perspective of the intent of how this was supposed to work out. So
Okay.
moving on.
So if we take a look at page 5, we've got the summary of the hotline. I was thinking, it's funny, when I was putting this together, every single 8 to 5 job I have ever worked in my life has had some kind of hotline or complaint portal that I've been involved with. And if you haven't worked with one of these before, though, I'd say that 80 to 90% of the things that come through don't have a lot of validity to them. Not to say we don't do some background work or some investigation work on them, but you can fairly easily tell based on the information submitted which ones have some legitimacy to them. Anyway, we've had 7 cases for 2023. 2 of those were received in the last 10 days and are active and ongoing. One's about to close. Other is a little bit more difficult investigation, and if we do go into executive session and talk about the IT report, we might choose to discuss that a little bit in further detail. And again, those visualizations there, the charts, they're a little bit different than what Andrea presented. So I know if there's not data there that you want, feel free to email me, let me know, get it added for future meetings. And then the very last thing is the recommendations. 12 were closed since our last meeting, 6 added from the audit that we just discussed, Sheriff's Office. In total, we've got 17 recommendations currently open and being worked by management. So that's the report.
All right, are there any other questions for Zach on any of these?
Good job.
There's a lot to cover, appreciate it. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Jay.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think
I just
we
wanted
just
to
do
say, Zach, welcome. I know you're drinking from the fire hose, and there's a lot of pending projects, former projects, things in the hopper, things going forward, staffing. This is your first report to the audit committee, and I just want to say thank you. Appreciate the hard work. It's a lot in a short amount of time, but we look forward as you continue to build the staff, continue to sort of work on things to, take the office to the next level, and looking forward to serving on the audit committee to see what we can do to support you and the team.
All right, the next item I want to jump down to is the dates for the next audit committee meetings for this year. We were trying to look at that, and I think we have, January was going to have to be on a Tuesday anyway, if we were to assume that, but.
Can't be there on a Tuesday.
Okay,
Can we do a Wednesday?
I can do any day, I think.
A Wednesday in the,
I-
yeah, I mean, I can do a Wednesday as long as it's not too late.
So if we did it, and let's see, I'm assuming that's Wednesday, the 17th?
January 17th.
Okay,
I mean, if it's at 3 or 4 o'clock, I can do it. If it's at 5 or later, it would be difficult on a Wednesday.
what works for you guys, 3 o'clock? So we'll do, all right, so, okay, so this is on Wednesday. Wednesday the 17th, so well, I'll get with Drew and see what we can find out about availability of the room. I'm not sure how it works on, Mondays she can control pretty much, or it's easier. And so we have, that's going to be our first one. It looks like we're still going to need to have something in February based on what we talked about with schools and ACFR and all of that. So I just had a TBD day on that, which I don't know I'm not even sure when the workshop probably would have been on the 19th. Oh, that's right, they got a weird, in February is the 21st. All right, so, but they were doing something around, wasn't county commission having some scheduling problems or something?
Yeah, I don't think, because we've got a finance committee meeting that day too, beer board, so you might have to do it like a Thursday, the 22nd or something, but you could look at the.
Okay. 21st is fine. Right.
Correct, Chairman?
That sounds, so if that's it, I will look for, the 21st is a Wednesday,
Maybe go to a Thursday?
or 22nd, which is,
Yeah, don't do more, do it the 22nd then.
all right, we'll see what we can do with that. That's a Thursday. Again, I don't know about the time, but we'll shoot for a 3 o'clock. I'm sorry. Okay.
The 22nd.
And then I don't know that we'll need one in March. I was figuring we'd have either February or March. So I'm going to scratch March for now. I'm not even sure if these other months are,
Leave those blank.
yeah, I can come back with those because right now I think those are also Mondays, probably. All right, so given the Monday, you'd rather not have workshop Monday, we would, but maybe Wednesday's better than Tuesday on those.
Wednesday's better than Tuesday.
Okay. So I'll just shoot for these on a Wednesday.
And just to confirm, the 17th, January, I just want to make sure Ted's good with that too for the school's date. I think it was the 13th last year when the school's report came out, so just making sure there's a couple days there to react.
I don't think you're turning
Okay.
on.
I'm keeping up with these dates, and those dates work for my schedule. The January one will be tight as far as wrap-up goes, so that's the question mark. I would say we're near 100% sure that we would want to meet in February. If January works, that's great. If not, then we may want to tentatively keep that March date at least as available, unless you want to double up in February.
Probably double up in February, or hopefully we can still get one of them in January. I'd like to think we could get the schools in January if you get your meeting with the school board.
The schools will be dependent entirely on whether we meet the first week in January, because then they won't meet again until the first week in
Right,
February.
and it seems like that's happened the last couple of years, so maybe it'll will, and if it doesn't, then I'll get back with you and we'll
Correct.
go from there.
The audit, I fully expect the audit report for the schools to be done before the time of our January
Right.
meeting for this audit committee.
So you could go ahead and, I don't know when you asked to be put on their agenda, so I'll let you work with that.
Okay.
All right, let's go back to the item 11, the IT security assessment report. The thought process was to go into an executive session on this. We have a lengthy report from the vendor. I don't know that there's anything earth-shattering in it. It's the only way we can really discuss it and let you guys know what was done and the scope of it. So I don't know that it'll be an in-depth meeting. I know you've got to be able to get out of there by 3:30ish, right? something like that, so. Well, if we're in agreement, I need a motion and a second to go into executive session.
Make a motion to go into executive session.
Motion and second, right, with Jay? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. It passes. So the last thing we're going to do now that we've done that is we're going to adjourn this meeting, and we will go up to the mayor's conference room on the 6th floor. We're adjourned.